Hey folks, Hammeh here, bit of a roundup for you of Overwatch news coming from an interview today that Seagull, everyone's favourite avian Overwatch streamer, did with Scott Mercer, the principal designer for Overwatch at Gamescom 2017. There's lots of interesting little bits of news in here, including how the Overwatch team's philosophy is in approaching certain issues and what they think about things, so I'm going to round it all up for you as quickly as possible. All credit to Skytis and OK But I'm Trash, who rounded up both clips and various points from the stream over on Reddit. Those threads are in the description below and the pinned comment. Timecode's in the description below if you want to skip as well. Okay, here we go. First up, Mercy Changes. Now, Seagull has talked a lot about his opinions on Mercy as a hero, as well as her resurrect ability. And when asked about Mercy, Scott Mercer said they couldn't share anything just now, but they've been working on some Mercy changes that will be coming at some point. They're very interesting and sweet changes, quote unquote. Now, although we have no more details than that, we can speculate a little bit as to what they might be and what they might be looking to address. Now, I'll be very careful as to how I describe this, but Seagull has in the past on his stream expressed a particular opinion about Mercy that some people in the community, and I'm not going to say all, share. And there is a particular one trick, and note that I'm making the differentiation here between a one trick, a main, and someone who plays a lot of Mercy. If you're a one trick, you play huge amounts of Mercy and hardly anything of anything else. If you're a Mercy main, you play maybe a lot of Mercy, but you play a reasonable amount of other heroes to the degree that you can probably flex. So some people have discussed in the past months about a one-trick Mercy style of play in solo queue. Now, if you're playing 6v6 or if you're playing grouped as Mercy, then sometimes if you're playing in big groups against big groups, or even if you see Mercy in pro level of play, there's a very different style of play in groups to there is in terms of solo queuing, which is a big chunk of it has recently been, whether people have thought it correct or not, the hide for res style of play. Whether or not that's good Mercy play is what a lot of people have been doing, whether they've been trying to get lots of reses or big reses in their stats. There has been a debate about that around SR gain and loss as well recently. I think that's something that Blizzard are going to be looking to try and address. Well, Mercy is not an easy character to change in many ways, and res has been tweaked in different ways. For example, this invulnerability when Mercy reses was something that was added afterwards when people felt she wasn't being played as much. The fact is that in general competitive and in quick play, Mercy is a hugely played hero. She's one of the most, if not the most popular heroes in Overwatch for people to play in general by a large factor. So if you change her too much, you risk alienating a substantial chunk of the player base. A lot of people play Mercy. However, how can she be changed to make her maybe a little bit more engaging, a little bit more kind of interactive perhaps in terms of her playstyle, and how can hide for res perhaps be discouraged a little bit, or how can Mercy be given more tools so that hide for res isn't one of the only facets of her playstyle? I think her ultimate may receive changes, but I think that it's got to be something to do with more of a rework. You can't make Mercy as a hero, and I'm going to say this carefully, a heavily aim-based character for what she tries to do. We've got Ana as an aim-based healer, for example. Mercy players, people who are new to first-person shooters, people who pick up play Mercy and play Overwatch may not want to play an Ana style of hero, and that's totally okay. It's good to have these spread of heroes. The challenge with Mercy is that she has a very powerful tool in her resurrect that encourages a certain type of play. So I think there are ways to make Mercy more engaging and perhaps incentivize Mercy players to be more active in a game. And I know, of course, a lot of you Mercy players, when I play Mercy, you can be very active already, whether you're pocketing a Pharah, moving around a lot between your different people, trying to make sure that everyone's topped up and not dying with the positioning. There is a lot of activity in that already, I do know that. But I think one thing that Blizzard could maybe do is perhaps introduce to her another active ability. Now, people have often questioned why Mercy has Guardian Angel and nothing else in terms of the abilities when other heroes have more active abilities. I think that could be another route. Giving something Mercy extra that incentivizes players to be perhaps more active in combat without nerfing the hide for res playstyle too much. So there might be some way that you can tweak Mercy that incentivizes Mercy players to be more active in combat perhaps. Well, it's going to be interesting what they see, and don't forget with the D.va changes that may well be coming to the PTR sometime soon, as well as the undocumented Doomfist change that's on the PTR, the one that reduces the hitbox of his rocket punch, Blizzard are listening to tweaks and things that we in the community are saying, and indeed Scott addressed that specifically later in his talk with Seagull. So what kind of Mercy changes do you think could be coming? Do you think that the route of incentivizing Mercy players in some ways to perhaps get benefits for being more active, or do you think maybe tweaking the hiding for res style of play, maybe making that a little bit more dangerous or less beneficial is the way forward? I think Mercy's ult is going to get some kind of tweak maybe, but I think that can't be all that happens. Love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Okay, on to the rest of the news. So Seagull and Scott Mercer talked about a lot of things, and there was an interesting talk about Season 6 and potentially matchmaking changes changes coming, but also the team's philosophy around matchmaking. It does feel from the discussion that the two had that there are going to be some matchmaking changes coming in Season 6. Scott Mercer said quite a few times we can't talk about Season 6 just yet, and obviously that's probably going to happen closer to the time, late August, early September, when the season changeover is coming. One thing that Scott did talk about quite a bit was some of the philosophies that the team were perhaps more interested in addressing, even though some of these might not happen in the short term. They weren't entirely sure that a role select system that a lot of people have been talking about would perhaps work entirely well for Overwatch, but they did mention some philosophies that they try and tune the matchmaking perhaps towards. One of these was preventing there being no support or tank players in a game. So trying to tweak matchmaking somehow under the hood to make sure that there are support and tank players in the game. Now, I do get that theory, but I've had many games where I've had 3 or 4 support mains, shall we say, or had support or tank mains who then decide that they want to play at something else. And of course, people want to get better at other heroes, they want to try and widen their hero pool, and if you played a lot of hero in quick play, then you want to try it in competitive. So although that is a good idea, it's going to be tough to see how it works out in practice. Now, another thing that Scott mentioned was preventing multiple people who want to play a certain hero from being in one match, which kind of makes sense. So if you have a lot of people, say, who have played a lot of Hanzo in a game recently, then you don't want to put people who have played a lot of Hanzo in a lot of matches recently all in the same competitive match. And Scott did mention that how some of these things could perhaps improve matchmaking and reduce toxicity. Is there a way that the matchmaker can somehow identify that, particularly if they've been playing a lot of that hero recently? That's an additional thought that I've had. And then stop them from being in the same competitive game. Blizzard did mention, and Scott did mention, that they were aware of one-tricking, but they think it's not perhaps as much of a big of a deal as maybe the community perceive it to be. Now, of course, that's something that's very stat dependent. If Blizzard can see the stats, then it'd be interesting if they shared some of that with us. But a lot of what Scott mentioned in terms of matchmaking was more to do with how can we prevent certain things rather than how can we prevent one-tricking, for example. How can they address the matchmaker underneath the hood to maybe encourage or put certain types of team composition together rather than penalising this one-tricking behaviour. Scott actually said that no support main is more of a problem in matchmaking to them. Again, anecdotally, I've seen a lot of support players in several games, but then you do get those games where there are a lot of DPS players as well. And the final thing Scott mentioned on matchmaking was that they'd like to encourage or try and find a way of putting players together playing something that they are good at, and they felt that, say for example, if you have 3 players who are good at or feel they're good at or spend a lot of time on soldier in a game and one person locks soldier, then that player is forced to play something that they're not as good at, and then that can be some of the reasons for frustration and maybe for some toxicity if a player is forced onto a hero that they are not as good at, and they wanted more of that in the matchmaker. So interesting thoughts on matchmaking there. Interesting to hear Blizzard's philosophy behind it. It will be interesting to see what changes, if any, Season 6 brings, but Scott did mention a lot of this thinking is probably going to be a bit more mid to long term. Now, one thing that people have been asking for is perhaps the possibility of some kind of MMR reset. Now, MMR stands for matchmaking rating. Your SR is your publicly visible expression of your rank. Your matchmaking rating is something that is tweaked under the hood by several factors, including the maps you're playing on, whether you're on attack or defense, your performance on a particular hero, and many, many other things as well. Now, Scott did mention that this is unlikely to happen. In Season 2, or one of the earlier seasons, the bell curve of people at SR, so how many people were at each SR, was kind of squashed a little bit, and people complained a lot about match qualities. So Scott's argument or case was that if you reset MMR, that would cause a much exaggerated version of that season where everyone thought that they had perhaps overskilled or underskilled people in their games. If you had an MMR reset, you would have Grandmaster players playing with silvers or bronzes until the point of the system stabilizing and everyone finding their rating. So it would create a very horrible, for a lot of people, short period of time. Now, I do understand that. You don't want to have that kind of exaggerated situation, but what I do think would be good is if there is a system or a tool where a player, after a certain amount of playtime or once in a blue moon, can have a go at resetting their MMR without creating a second account. There is this feeling, whether it's accurate or not, and I'm not sure that Blizzard will ever talk about this, that if you have an account with a substantial history on it, it's harder, if you improve as a player, to change that MMR value. This is why a lot of people create secondary accounts for various reasons. So it'd be interesting to see if anything happens on that, but if there's going to be no MMR reset, then is having to buy another copy of the game, create another account, the way forward in terms of getting a new matchmaking rating or being able to prove perhaps that you've either improved or not improved. Okay, a bunch of little factoids of pieces of news. There is apparently a more advanced stat screen coming, so maybe we could compare in future how long it takes to charge a Genji ult compared to someone else, or how many kills on average that we could get with our ultimate. So more points of statistics to see how we're performing on particular heroes. Match history is going to be coming. That'll be interesting to see. The replay system, as we've known for a while, they are also working on, as well as improvements to the spectator experience, which again has been discussed for a while. That will be very, very important for the growth of competitive Overwatch and Overwatch esports. Now, it was asked if there would be improvements to the training area, and Scott did discuss they were thinking about it perhaps, but it would come down to where's the best place or a better place to practice your aim. Now, I do wonder, the way that he sort of talked about it as to whether that Blizzard see deathmatch as being the answer to this. What better way is there to practice your aim than aiming against live targets? Now, on Chateau Guillard, the deathmatch map that's on the PTR at the moment, it's very, very Pharah friendly around the edges, and you will always see people playing Pharah. So one thing that people mention quite a lot is that they'd like flying targets in the practice range. What's a better flying target than a flying Pharah in Chateau Guillard? So I do think that maybe Blizzard are introducing deathmatch instead of perhaps improvements to the training area, but we'll see what happens. Seagull asked specifically as to whether skins could be changed before the match starts, and Blizzard said that there might be some problems with loading of assets and models, because at the moment assets and models all get loaded before the match, so your pre-selected skin is already included in that match loading process. As for map making tools, this is one that's been brought up quite often. I think Jeff Kaplan has mentioned in interviews in the past that they would rather provide these tools at some point, but it's not going to happen anytime soon. And if they wanted to provide something, they would rather provide it in terms of being something that's very complicated to access, but that could let people create really, really good maps, rather than create something that's very easy to access, but then would perhaps cause a lot of average or perhaps not very good maps to be created. People have requested higher tick rate servers. Now, the Overwatch World Cup runs at a way higher tick rate to the normal server. There's no plans for it to come to normal matchmaking soon because of hardware requirements. As for map rotation as being a possibility, Scott did say that deactivating some maps for a certain time like a season might be something that could happen in the future, but only when there's more maps. They'd rather perhaps not have it, but it's not something that's off the table. So again, StarCraft, for example, switches its map pool from season to season and from time to time. It'd be interesting to see if it comes to Overwatch in future, but we would need more maps than we have currently to make that an option. What do you think of those changes? A whole bunch of interesting things that might be coming to Overwatch. What do you think of the D.va changes and Mercy changes? And I've talked on for a while, but do let me know your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear them. Cheers for tuning in. Don't forget, of course, to tune into my channel tomorrow for analysis of the new Overwatch animated short for the lore and learnings and everything that we get from it. And if you like Overwatch lore, story, voice lines, and much more besides, do check out all of my playlists linked here. Cheers for tuning in. I've been Hammeh. Take it easy.